Hello and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar titled Double-Digit Organic Growth in Banking, the $4 billion Logix Story. I'm Julie Johnson, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. Before we begin, I'd like to review just a couple of housekeeping items. First, we have a lot of time at the end of the webinar for questions. So you can submit a question by just typing it into the question box located in your GoToWebinar toolbar. Secondly, if you'd like copies of the slides presented today, we'd be happy to send them to you. Just send an email request to info@micronotes.com. That's info@micronotes.com. All right, I think we're ready to begin. It's my great pleasure to introduce our two panelists today. First up is Brad Blue, Online Marketing and Social Media Manager at Logix Federal Credit Union. No matter what I was to say about Brad, it would be easy to find the truth about him with a simple Google search. This applies to business as well, and the new business rules created by such transparency are what make Brad look forward to each day spent working in credit union marketing. If you really were thinking about running a search, you'd find that Brad writes frequently for CU Insight and has been the recipient of industry awards like CUES Rookie of the Year and Mac Social Media Superstar. You'd also find lots of stuff about the CSU Rams, some truly awful puns, and many gushing posts about his wife and new daughter. Our second panelist today is Devin Kincaid. Devin is a serial entrepreneur and founder and CEO of Micronotes, an interview marketing automation company based out of Cambridge, Mass. So without further delay, I'll turn it over to Brad and Devin.
Thank you very much, Julie. And Brad, welcome to today's webinar. We're so happy to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me, Devin. I really appreciate you having me as well.
Great. Well, today is going to be a great talk. This is an incredible story of growth and of strategy and of excellence in marketing and execution. And we're just so happy to be here with Brad. So we've completed the introductions for today. I'm Devin. You just heard from Brad. So we're going to talk about the role of marketing in Logix success. We're also going to talk about Brad's view of cross-selling versus acquisition. This is a constant tension in the world of banking. And then we're going to get Brad's views on the future of bank marketing and what that's going to look like in a increasingly marketing technology-enabled world. So first, let me brag a little bit about Logix. Logix, which was formerly the Lockheed Federal Credit Union, is now a $4.5 billion institution providing smarter banking primarily in the greater Los Angeles area and is now boasting 165,000 members. Perhaps more incredibly, which was what prompted the title of today's webinar, is that they managed to achieve 13% year-on-year member growth last year and 18.5% year-on-year loan growth, which is just extraordinary to achieve in this kind of a marketplace and to do so organically. So that's what we're going to talk about today, and it's a super exciting topic. Micronotes, as you may or may not know, is we're a cloud-based marketing automation company. What we do is leverage fast interviews, fast automated interviews, and a whole bunch of back-end machine learning to solve the digital engagement problem, which is essentially banner blindness. So without further ado, we're going to run a quick poll just to get the audience involved a little bit. And so if you would please take a second and just answer this question. How do you think Logix stacked up to the very best banks in a January 2016 Consumer Reports Reader Survey? I mean, how do you think they did? So we'll give you about 10 seconds to answer this question. Do you think they were better or about the same or not quite as good? And we're talking about the best banks. So we'll give folks another couple seconds, and then Julie, if you would show us the results, that would be terrific. Better than the best banks. Well, that's pretty good. That's a pretty good guess, actually. So here's how Logix actually did stack up to the best banking institutions in the United States. So, and this also is pretty reflective, I think, of NPS scores, but this is actually Consumer Reports reader scores. So Logix actually fared very, very well. The highest scoring bank in the U.S. was USAA, and Logix was very close to USAA with a reader score of 93 versus 95. The next highest scoring bank in the size category that Logix is in was the best one was 91, which is Frost Bank. And then I just dropped in one of the better performing of the top four, which was Chase at 81. So Brad, Logix is clearly one of the top banking institutions in the United States. What role does marketing, I know you're in the marketing department, so what role does marketing play in that success?
Sure. Marketing plays an important role for sure, although I can't emphasize enough that marketing is largely the beneficiary of course, literally nothing had happened until I started talking, and now a fighter jet is flying over my house. I hope you guys can't hear that.
No, actually.
Yeah, marketing is largely the beneficiary of a really amazing overall strategy, which is just a laser focus on incredible member service. And so from a brand perspective, our job in marketing is really just to facilitate referral activity. Like most credit unions, a very large chunk of our business, the majority of our business, in fact, comes from referral activity. So we just want to make sure that members have the right tools and really the right things to talk about when they're out doing our marketing for us. From a cross-sales perspective, our job is just to make sure that the sales departments have the right tools they need to get the job done, and probably more importantly, have enough volume to meet their numbers. And we're really, really serious about that in our marketing department, because at the end of the year, all the service departments at Logix get an NPS score from the customer-facing departments, just as our customer-facing departments get NPS scores from our member. And our bonus is impacted very much by this NPS score we get from the sales teams.
Yeah, I think that is a very unique feature. As you know, we've worked with you guys for a couple of years now, and I think that's a really cool and very unique feature about Logix as an organization. Is you have, not only do you run the organization outwardly based on the Net Promoter Score, which is SatMatrix and Bain technology, but you also run it internally. So everybody inside the institution's got a customer. Brad, can you reflect on what that's like, and maybe compared to other places you've worked? What is it like to live in an environment where you have to find a customer within the organization, then you actually have to perform to that customer's requirements, and you get measured against it? How's that different from any other places that you've worked?
I love it, Devin, because you get a lot more feedback, and you actually feel like you're doing a good job and improving at your job, instead of just getting the feedback, that you're doing a good job. For example, you get real feedback all the time that you can act upon. And just like any business, I guess in your department it just feels more like you're in a real business, because you're always trying to please the customer. And you might think that such program might cause a little bit of animosity, and occasionally it does, because you're affecting somebody else's pay. But I'd say for the most part, it really creates an environment of mutual respect and makes everyone aware that the other departments are constantly working on their behalf. So there's a lot of communication, more communication involved than you might expect in other organizations because of this program.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I suspect, I would imagine that it also forces a lot of front-end conversations around, so who's the customer for this? If some new thing comes in that someone wants to do, I'm guessing that there's a conversation about there's an immediate conversation about who the customer is for this and how they're going to value it more often than you would see in an organization that's not so internally customer focused.
Absolutely, that happens a lot, and this isn't as much related to the internal NPS, but one of the things that we do is kind of like what you mentioned, is in all of our meetings we actually have a voice of the members sitting in that meeting, somebody whose whole job it is just to talk to the people in the meeting about how a member is going to feel about this. So it goes back to that intense focus on member service, regardless of whether we're talking about the members of our credit union or the people we're servicing internally.
Yeah, brilliant. So that obviously impacts the Logix culture a lot. And so how do you hold on to those? How do you hold on to that culture as you're growing so rapidly? Sometimes companies lose their cultural identity because of the influx of a lot of new people, and they struggle to maintain that. Or how do you guys do it?
It's definitely been a struggle, and I'll cover later on in this session, but we have actually changed some of our business policies just to make sure that we never lose the culture that we've got, which is an intensely service-driven culture. But what we found is that as we grew, we were just hiring and hiring, and in some cases not hiring people who were ideal culture fits, and in most cases the new hires didn't really have a lot of opportunity to start fitting in with the culture before they were really at full sprint with their job. So before we even make the hire, we instituted a second interview called a culture interview, and it is of equal importance to the skills interview. And it really is just sitting down with somebody and talking for half an hour about what they value in a company's culture, about the culture at Logix, and making sure from both the perspective of the company and the perspective of the new hire that this is going to be a good fit. And so at the end of that, the person is given a rating based on their culture fit, and it factors very heavily into whether the person is hired at all.
Wow. Very clever, very clever. And I've also noted that you are very cautious in your growth plans to maintain your member NPS scores, which is a terrific way to put a governor on growth so you don't start disappointing a bunch of folks. That's terrific. God, good advice. And this robot. So what's with the robot?
I love it. Logix, as he was named by our members, was actually an accident when we were rebranding from Lockheed to Logix. The web designer put this little guy on one of the web pages and had a clever little robot saying, and everyone on the team loved the robot, and he just kind of grew and grew and grew, and pretty soon he was on our posters and all of our social media, and really he's kind of the face of the brand now, which was never intended as we were planning out this new brand. But members love engaging with, and most of the staff really likes him as well.
Well, I think he's great. Like occasionally, if you're not familiar, you'll see him wearing, season-appropriate clothing. Like around Christmas time, I noticed he has a really nice scarf on and stuff. Love it. Let's talk about this tension between cross-selling and acquisition. So, at Micronauts, if you check out our blogs, we write extensively and do a lot of math around the wisdom of, spending, different allocations of your budget on cross-selling versus acquisition. If you're interested in a rule of thumb, our math suggests that you ought to spend about 70% on acquisition, about 30% on cross-selling. All else being equal, but just why? Well, there's a whole bunch of reasons, but it's a lot less expensive. It increases tenure, and tenure increases the probability that you'll get more cross sales, and that's a very virtuous loop. But I wanted to ask Brad, sort of apart from the the micronodes heavy math approach to doing optimization on any particular marketing budget, how do you think about this tension between the requirement to get new members versus the requirement to deepen your relationship with existing members? How do you think about that?
This year is actually rather unique, Devin, in that we grew so fast, and as I mentioned before, we're very laser focused on member service, and we found that some of our NPS ratings were going down very slightly, but enough to where we thought it might be important to put on the brakes on new acquisition almost altogether and really focus on that member experience and making sure that all the new accounts that came to us over the past several years have the kind of full relationship that we want to have and that we do enjoy with some of our longer tenured members. So if you'd asked me this last year, it probably would have been pretty close to that 70-30, and I haven't looked at the math this year, but I can tell you for sure that the breakdown is much more in favor of looking at existing member accounts and increasing the value of those accounts, and that's actually one of the reasons Micronotes was such a great fit for us this year is because it's within online banking and because it's so personal and does such a good job of helping us discover what our especially new members might be interested in. It's really helping us increase the value of those relationships.
Thanks for that. You're also, if I remember right, you're also at the top of Radin's services per household index. Is that right?
Yeah, we have been for quite some time. I believe we're at 95% cross-sold households or something like that, which puts us firmly in the top percent there. And so it is a little bit odd that we are re-intensifying our efforts to get that cross-sold household ratio up even further, but that is what we're doing.
Well, it's interesting. I just actually wrote a piece which will probably come out in Bank Director magazine in another couple of weeks, and I'm actually increasingly convinced that that the biggest problem in banking is actually retention, and the best way to make sure retention occurs is to have those deep relationships. And if you want any evidence to that fact, look at the performance of Logix and look at the market capitalization of Wells Fargo. If you look at those two data points, I think you'll ultimately agree. So solving the engagement problem. So just to brag a little bit about what you guys have been able to do with our platform. Here you see what the big banks are getting with targeted banners. These are analytic, heavy analytics on the back end, but a banner ad on the front end. Click-through rates are pretty standard, about 0.08%, 5% conversion rate on the landing page. These are all secure side comparisons, by the way. Looking at Logix for 2015. Last year, you were a factor of 10 better on the interview, a factor of 100 better at logout, and consistently had higher conversion rates, much higher than you would see with the banners. You've obviously come a very long way in conquering this banner blindness problem. What I wanted to ask, though, is how are other bank marketers? How do you see them solving this digital engagement problem? I mean, there are a bunch of different MarTech companies, out there, and sort of what are you seeing, and some of the other organizations that you stay in touch with?
Some really exciting, cool things. Honestly, I recently had the opportunity to go to the Financial Brand Forum in Las Vegas, and some of the new fintech coming out specifically for online banking user interface is really, really spectacular, and some of the engagement results they talk about are really exciting. I think that's awesome for the consumer, and it's definitely, you know, a new interface for online banking is definitely something that's in our future. But the brands that are interested in that right now tend to be more kind of tech-first brands, and we are not a tech-first brand. We're a service-first brand with the intention of being a fast follower technology. And so while I really respect and admire what other marketers out there are doing for the digital engagement and banner blindness, that's not how we immediately went about solving it. We just went back to our basics, which is which of these vendors is going to be a service-first vendor, not just for Logix, you know, because just like we're rated by the frontline staff, certainly we expect a lot out of our vendors, and so we wanted a vendor who was going to be really engaged with us and understood what we were doing. And then a vendor that was going to be able to increase personal relationships, you know, not as much with fancy user interface, as much as just helping us basically be an extension of that in-person sales process. You know, I guess what I like about Micronotes is that they're much more similar to the way you would interact with a teller than with a fancy user interface. They ask you questions and get you engaged and learn about you. And ultimately, I think the members appreciate, and we can actually demonstrate that they appreciate, that we're making an effort to learn about them instead of just sell to them.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think one of the things we've been thinking about a lot lately is just sort of the anthropological implications of, you know, starting a conversation and letting the member finish it. Instead of finishing it for them with an offer, let them choose their own path, you know, through the interview process. I think that's it's a friendlier way to go, and frankly, it's a more productive way to go. You guys have sold a lot of stuff through asking questions, and I think the results demonstrate that to be so. Let's do one more poll. Julie, if you would be kind enough to run our second poll. So please take a moment to answer this question. How many marketing technology companies do you think there are today in the United States? Today, that is 2016. What do you think that number looks like? Is it 380, 3,800, or 38,000? So we'll give you about 10 seconds to take your best shot at that question. And then Julie, as soon as you're ready, you can show us the results. Wow, we got a we got a lot of smart people out there. So and we have a lot of people who actually, and we have a fair amount of people who actually are feeling like there are 38,000 MarTech companies out there. So turns out there are actually 3,800 companies. Just to give you some sense of scale, I mean, and it may feel like 38,000 some days if you're on the receiving end of a lot of that MarTech. Just to give you a sense of growth, there were 150 companies in 2011. There are 3,800 now. So the real question, I think, is you know, Brad, you know, how do you make sense out of that? I mean, that's such an incredible plethora of options. How do you choose?
You know, as I mentioned before, it's really simple for us. We look for brands. We look for vendors that approach us with a service-first mentality. You know, and there's some really cool stuff that we're looking at that's more just from a wow, that's cool technology perspective. But we just say, is this going to help us reach our goal of providing great member service or helping members refer us? So we use things like Bazaar Voice to put member reviews on our website. We use things like FriendBuy, which is a social media referral tool, and of course we use micronotes to just make sure that members have sufficient opportunity to tell us and to tell their what they need and what Logix is doing for them and or can do them for them.
Nice. Well said. And I really like that. So here's a dizzying array of options, but it's all rooted in the strategy, and it's all rooted in the brand and what it needs to stand for. And I think that's very wise counsel indeed. So let's wrap up by just talking about the future of banking from your perspective, and then we'll take a couple of questions if there are any. So if you think about the future of banking, Brad, along the dimensions of mobile, and it's got to be personal, and it's got to be smart, and it also has to be smarter over time. It actually has to learn. Where do you see it where do you see it headed along those dimensions?
I think you kind of answered your own question there as far as these four things. That's where it seems to be heading. Although I am the first person to admit I'm not a futurist here. I just kind of sit back with a bucket of popcorn and watch where all this stuff is going and just kind of admire what's happening. And then I pick and choose what's right for our brand, and I think that's important for marketers and the banking industry to do in general, is especially with marketing, is to understand that you're not creating your brand anymore, but you are reacting to what your brand actually is, what people say it is. And so learning about what people are saying about your brand, learning about what your brand actually is, and then finding the right technology to suit it, in my mind, is a much better idea than trying to predict where it's all going to go and try to get ahead of that. Because when you do that, I feel like you spend most of your time racing maybe in the wrong direction with a few wins now and then, whereas it's much more effective to just stick with the basics, stick with what you're good at and what your brand actually is, and pick the right tools to suit it.
Yeah, that's really cool, and I think that's a somewhat contrarian view where the brand stands for this and everything's going to be about this, as opposed to a more evolutionary social approach, which is this is what we stand for, but we also need to listen, right, through the social channels as well as through all the digital channels and through the personal channels as well. So I hear some sort of evolution and feedback loops in your approach, which I like.
Thanks. Yeah, listening is probably the very most important thing we do from a brand standpoint. Actually, that might be an interesting segue to the questions.
Yeah, indeed. All right, so I think we're going to stop at this point because we're just about at the end of our time, and we will entertain any questions. Julie, we'll turn it back to you to enable folks to ask any questions that they might like.
Great. Thank you, Brad and Devin. That was great. So if any of our audience members have any questions for Brad or Devin, feel free to submit them via the question box of the GoToWebinar toolbar. We have had a question come in from one of our listeners. They asked, I'm part of a small credit union, a $38 million credit union, and we don't have a marketing and or sales department. And the question is, Brad, can you give some advice on, how these principles you talked about could apply to such a small institution? Do they transcend, I guess?
Yeah, I feel like they do. In fact, I've often thought, I came from a credit union here in Denver that was $226 million, and I've often thought about how helpful micronotes would be for that organization. A lot of times with a smaller organization, the marketing department is doing is more like a jack of all trades. And if you have a lot of different tools trying to achieve a bunch of different end results, it's pretty hard to keep up with. One thing that I really like about micronotes in particular, and forgive me, now that I think about it, I'm not sure that the question specifically mentioned micronotes, but one thing I really, really enjoy about micronotes in particular is that they do almost all the work for me, aside from that I let them know the topics that I'm interested in questioning our members about. And a lot of times they'll even topics, and I'll go ahead and either agree with them or kind of coach them into the right topic. But as far as that goes, after we've agreed on that, it's largely fire and forget. And so it frees me up to do a lot of the other things that keep me busy, and I can see how that would be especially valuable at a smaller organization. Did that come close to answering the question?
Yeah, I think that gives the listener great feedback. Here's another question for you. This question comes from Jessica. She says, do you have an incentive program to motivate employees to cross-sell your products?
We definitely do, but I mean, most of the incentive is in their commissions. I don't know a ton about the sales side, to be honest with you. As far as how they're paid, I see that they have different programs going on all the time to kind of gamify the sales process, if you will, to make it fun to sell and to have different stages of reward. But I probably can't speak on that too much because I just don't go beyond their own commissions to have incentive for cross-sales.
Got it. Thank you. Well, great. Well, it looks like we're out of time now. Thank you so much to all of our listeners who have tuned in today. And thanks especially to Brad from Logix for joining us, and Devin, of course, for sharing his expertise. So at this time, I'll officially conclude the webinar. As a reminder, if you'd like copies of today's slides, just send an email request to info@micronotes.com. And if you're interested in learning more about innovative digital marketing solutions, specifically for financial institutions, you can visit the Micronotes website at www.micronotes.com. And thanks for joining us today, and we hope you'll join us again soon. Have a good day.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.